Race? Would the MPs and senators like to come up as well? You have everybody? Okay, there. Okay. There. Thank you for being here. Sorry for the delay. No one ever expects such a long time to get through security, despite best of plans. My name is Fareed Khan. I'm the sponsor of the petition on change.org. Joining me today, Dr. Mani Madzig, well-known human rights activist, author, and academic. Rais Ahmed, member of the Canadian Rohingya community, who's been actively campaigning for justice for the Rohingya in Myanmar for years. Ahmed Ramadan, who is the Canadian Outreach Director for Burma Task Force. Sadia Masroor, over there, is a human rights activist and Ottawa representative for the Burma Task Force. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge our parliamentarians who are here today to receive this petition for presentation in the House of Commons and the Senate. With us are Cheryl Hardcastle and Charlie Angus and Garnet Jennis. And unfortunately, do we have our Senator Selma Atalajan? Thank you very much. And I think our Liberal members are running a bit late. So anyway, thank you for being here today. We're here today to offer this petition signed by more than 43,000 people for presentation in the House of Commons and Senate. It calls on Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to act decisively to help the Rohingya minority in Myanmar, people who have been described by the UN as the most persecuted minority in the world. The petition asks the Prime Minister and the Canadian government to do a number of things. The first is to strip Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi of her Honourary Canadian Citizenship for her complicity in crimes against humanity and genocide. To unequivocally condemn the atrocities and genocide that is being committed by Myanmar's military and nationalist groups, and work with international partners to bring the perpetrators of these crimes to justice. To take leadership in the UN and on the international stage to impose an arms embargo on Myanmar. To work with international agencies and allies to create a safe haven for the Rohingya in Myanmar under the United Nations Protocol of Responsibility to Protect. And to work with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and leaders of other nations to address the humanitarian crisis that is taking place in Bangladesh, and to make sure that those Rohingya refugees who choose to settle in other countries are able to do so without difficulty. Unlike the Rohingya, our lives are a comparative paradise. We went to sleep last night in a warm bed, safe in the knowledge that we would wake up in the morning in safety and security. We woke up in the morning, got ready for the day, left for work, sent our kids off to school, without a worry about arriving at our destinations safely. However, the Rohingya don't have that luxury. The ones who are left alive in Myanmar live in constant fear for the safety of their family and loved ones, fear of getting raped, fear of going about their daily lives, fear about escaping the soldiers if they come, and about having to evade death squads of soldiers if they have to flee. And the ones who have survived the massacres and the burning of their homes and escaped into Bangladesh, they not only have to deal with the trauma of the horrors that they survived, but they also have to deal with survival in refugee camps without clean water, food, healthcare, or sanitation facilities. Over 500,000 of the 1.1 million Rohingya who were in Myanmar before they had to flee to Bangladesh, starting in late August, early September, they joined the more than 600,000 refugees who were living in camps who had fled previous attacks on them by Myanmar forces. And these are the so-called lucky ones. So let me put a face on one of these refugees. What I'm about to describe is very graphic and disturbing, but stories like this need to be told if we are to convince the Canadian government and other nations to take leadership, find their humanity, and help these people. You may have heard of Rajma, a young woman who used to live in the village of Tulatoli. Her story was reported last week in the New York Times. Soldiers arrived in Rajma's village in late August and began setting homes on fire. Before most of the inhabitants could escape, they were rounded up. The men and boys were separated from the women and girls. All of the males were then executed in a brutal fashion in front of their distraught families. They were shot, they were stabbed, they had their throats slit, and they were beheaded. The women and young girls were made to stand and watch this brutality while holding their infants and young children. Rajma, who's about 20 years of age, was clutching her baby son and was picked out by one of the soldiers. He came up to her, he clubbed her in the face, and then grabbed her baby from her arms. He walked up to one of the nearby burning homes and threw the baby into it. Rajma was then dragged into a house that hadn't been set on fire, and the soldiers took turns raping her. She was unconscious when the soldiers left her, but not before they set fire to the house. She managed to regain consciousness in time and escaped into the jungle naked and bleeding. She lost her entire extended family and now is completely alone in the world, living in a refugee camp where she now has to try and survive. Tragically, her story is not a unique one. It's just one of the tens of thousands of stories that survivors are telling. And yet world leaders have done nothing more than to express outrage and disappointment at the brutal crimes being committed by the Myanmar government. Prime Minister Trudeau had a major opportunity to show leadership on this issue when he spoke to the United Nations last month, but he didn't devote a single sentence to the Rohingya when he had the attention of the world. He could have mentioned their plight and the responsibility of the world community to prevent more atrocities and act on the growing humanitarian crisis in neighboring Bangladesh. But he didn't, and I would love to ask him personally, Prime Minister, why? I've been asked many times since I started this petition, why am I doing this? The short answer is, because I'm a human being, and I had to do something to help a voiceless, powerless people who've been suffering the worst brutality that one can imagine, and they've been suffering for decades. The long answer is that I'm a child of refugee parents, and when I was young, they told me stories about what they endured when their families had to flee ethnic and sectarian violence, and how they suffered and what they witnessed as children. And I'm a man whose late wife was the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, who related stories to me that she heard growing up about what her father lived through. Many times at family gatherings, I saw the number tattooed on my father-in-law's arm by the Nazis, fully aware of the evil that that tattoo represented. It is an evil that was responsible for the death of most of my father-in-law's family by the Nazis, and it is the same type of evil that is being perpetrated on the Rohingya in Myanmar. Last month, Canada dedicated a national Holocaust monument across from the War Museum to remember the more than 6 million Jewish victims of the Nazis. The Prime Minister spoke at the dedication and said the following: "This monument is a reminder of the devastating cost of allowing hatred and tyranny to overcome openness, inclusion, and freedom. Today we reaffirm our unshakable commitment to fight anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, and discrimination in all its forms." I'd like to ask the Prime Minister how committed he is to those words. Because if he is sincere that Canada is committed to fighting racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, if Canada wants to claim to be a defender of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, then speaking out in defense of the Rohingya, the most persecuted minority in the world, a people who are voiceless, taking leadership on the world stage to help them, and acting on what the 43,000 people who signed this petition are calling for, is a no-brainer. The decision to make is clear, certainly to everyone up on this stage, and to the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Canadians who have signed this petition and other petitions that are calling for action. The truth is that if we don't act to help the Rohingya, then that Holocaust memorial that was dedicated a couple of weeks ago has already lost its meaning. And by failing to act, we insult the memory of the more than 6 million dead to whom that monument was dedicated, and we have learned none of the lessons that those deaths are supposed to teach us. In addition, as a self-proclaimed feminist, I would think that the Prime Minister would want to help the Rohingya without being urged, since women and girls have been targeted and subjected to unspeakable acts of brutality. They also make up the majority of survivors and are the ones most at risk in the refugee camps, and they need a feminist champion. 18th century Irish statesman Edmund Burke said, "All that is needed for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing." Well, more than 43,000 people have spoken through this petition and hundreds of thousands more through other petitions, and they are asking Canada to take action against the forces of evil in Myanmar, and instead of doing nothing, to take action to help those who are being massacred simply for existing. Prime Minister, the time for talking and speeches and discussions is over. Now is the time for leadership and action. And, how can Canada show the world, Canada should show the world the same resolve to help the Rohingya that Canadians and our Canadian government showed in helping Syrian refugees. Not only will Canadians support you, but you will help save the lives of thousands and show the world Canadian humanity in action. The time to act is not now, it was last month, but we are here and we're calling on our government to please listen to the voices who are speaking out on behalf of the Rohingya and to take action and to show Canada's best face to the world. Thank you. I would now like to call on Dr. Madzig if she could say a few words.
Bonjour, je suis ici ce matin avec un groupe de citoyens canadiens fortement préoccupés par ce qui se passe au Myanmar et par la crise humanitaire qui demande toute notre attention, tout notre intérêt et toute notre compassion. I am here today as a concerned citizen of Canada, horrified by the human tragedy happening in front of our eyes in Myanmar. Canada cannot keep watching quietly the killing of children, of babies, and women. Canada cannot keep standing still in the face of one of the horrible ethnic cleansing happening these days. After what happened in Rwanda, Canada said that it would do better next time. But today it is sad and disappointing to see the lack of courage of Canada. Today, as a concerned citizen, I have one simple demand, a demand supported by 43,000 other Canadians. This demand is simple to achieve, but highly symbolic, and can send a strong message to other countries and to other allies. Aung San Suu Kyi must be stripped of her honorary Canadian citizenship. It was an honor given to her. Unfortunately, she showed that she doesn't deserve that honor, and she showed her complicity with the murderer of her own people of Myanmar. Aujourd'hui, je demande au Premier ministre du Canada, en tant que citoyenne canadienne préoccupée par les atrocités qui se passent au Myanmar, que la citoyenne honoraire Aung San Suu Kyi, qui est un prix Nobel de la paix, doit être enlevée, on doit lui enlever sa citoyenneté canadienne parce que c'est un honneur qu'elle a reçu et pendant tout ce temps-là, elle n'a pas montré un signe de leadership, un signe qui montre qu'elle est préoccupée par ce qui arrive au peuple Rohingya du Myanmar. Donc, je répète que M. Trudeau a aujourd'hui le choix. Mr. Trudeau has a choice today. He can keep silent and keep Madame Aung San Suu Kyi with her Canadian citizenship, but he can also make the symbolic gesture. It is the least that he can do. And my colleague today would have more specific demands as what Canada can do politically, humanitarian ground, and on term of diplomatic relations as well. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Madzig. I would now like to call upon Rais Ahmed to please make a few remarks.
Respected guests, honorable members of Parliament and senators. On est ici aujourd'hui parce que 43 000 personnes ont demandé notre gouvernement à arrêter le génocide à Myanmar qui se roule présentement. 43 signatures. Those are 43,000 voices. Each of those voices represent a child that is being burned alive, an elderly that is being hacked to death, a man that is being shot dead while he's trying to escape the massacre, and a woman that's being gang raped by the soldiers of Myanmar. Let me tell you that these 43,000 signatories have not only signed petitions, they have rallied in their hometowns, sent letters to Prime Minister's office, to Foreign Affairs office, and met with their members of Parliament to personally demand that our government acts on this genocidal regime of Myanmar and a symbolic puppet of democracy named Aung San Suu Kyi, an honorary Canadian citizen that is not only a dishonor to Canada, but to the rest of the world that looked up to her for leadership at some point in time, a long time ago. Elle n'a pas seulement resté silencieuse face aux demandes de la communauté internationale, but has spoken up at times to show accomplice with the military generals, denying ethnic cleansing and saying it is Muslims killing Muslims, et que ce sont les musulmans qui brûlent leur propre village. The 43,000 signatures have asked our government to act, not just speak, and not just give money, but to act. Yes, our Prime Minister has written a letter to Aung San Suu Kyi. Yes, our Foreign Affairs Minister has called it ethnic cleansing. Her department has pledged aid, etc., etc. But the genocide continues. The burnings continue. The massacres continue. More than 500,000 people crossed the border to neighboring Bangladesh to escape the massacre during the last month alone. Ils vivent dans la rue, par la rivière, with tarps over their heads, supported by a couple of bamboo sticks, and quite often dead bodies to see afloat on the river that they just crossed. They live in such conditions after having witnessed the horrors of genocide with their very own eyes. Here is an extract from a Human Rights Watch article from October 4th. It says, witnesses also described seeing children executed. Hotias, 28, recounted the killing of her nephew. There was my nephew, Muhammad Tufail. He was 10 years old. He was a student of class 2. They shot him in the head. His skull shattered into 4 pieces. Then he fell down. I saw there was brain and blood on the floor. Mustafa, 22, said, there was a pit with the bodies of 10 to 15 children, all under 12 years old. They were all young children hacked to death. I recognized 4 of the bodies. Hakim Ali, 9. Naeem, 8. One child from Bondufara, who was about 10. And Chaumong, who was 8. Why do children of my ethnicity have to be hacked to death? Huh? Why do they have to end their life in a pit with other children that are hacked to death? Does my ethnicity does not have a right to exist? What have my people done? What have the people of my ethnicity done that their children should be massacred, their mothers raped and their houses burned? Qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait qu'ils doivent fuir leur maison, 500 000 entre eux, just because they have a different skin color, or speak a different language, or practice a different religion? And what have they done so that the rest of the world watches them silently, without any action, as though with complacency? I will now stop speaking as someone from the Rohingya ethnicity. Let me speak to you as a Canadian citizen. What I am, what I have grown up in the suburbs of Toronto, what I am proud of lorsque je vais au travail et je sers mon pays tous les jours en fierté. Let me speak from what my Canadian Charter asked me to uphold: freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of belief, and right to life, liberty, and security of the individual. What would my heroes Lester Pearson and Tommy Douglas do? What would Stephen Lewis and Craig Kilberger say to such massacre? Would we like to have another general write our history books about a genocide that we could have prevented but we chose not to prevent? In 2001, we championed the R2P that was later ratified by all members of the United Nations. Although the doctrine has faced criticism in the recent past and has not been put into effective use lately, Canada still has made it a point to the international community that we can and we will stand up for justice and human rights. Why can't we use that to leverage our influences today? Where is the peacekeeping agenda of this government? In 2015, when my government took office, it promised involvement in a peacekeeping mission as part of their agenda. To date, no peacekeeping mission has materialized. Yes, I realize that a UN-led peacekeeping mission may not be possible in the case of Myanmar, where Burmese authorities refuse to allow any international presence. In such case, why can't Canada push for a coalition-led peacekeeping mission with its closest allies, such as the US, UK, and France, all of whom have unequivocally condemned the massacre? La France a même utilisé le mot génocide dans l'Assemblée générale des Nations Unies. Il n'y a pas très longtemps. There's lots we can do. There's no doubt about it. But we'll only do if there is political will, which is something we lack in this matter. I urge each of you today, respected members of the House of Commons and the Senate, to create that political will to act. Not only that our socioeconomic, not only do we have a moral responsibility as a prosperous and peaceful nation to uphold peace and prosperity of others, not only that, our socioeconomic interests are directly related to our actions or inactions in Myanmar or Southeastern Asia. Our silence, or the silence of our allies today, will leave more room for China and Russia's influence to prevail in the region. Canada must work with its allies to take action on this matter, and we will certainly not be alone there. Our closest allies have already indicated that they are on the same page as us. In the very words of Deputy Asia Director of Human Rights Watch, Phil Robertson, these atrocities, that is the atrocities of Burmese regime and its army, demand more than words from concerned governments. They need concrete responses with consequences. A letter from Prime Minister Trudeau and a statement from Madame Freeland. These are nowhere close to concrete responses with consequences. These are just words. In mid-September, we already knew that 50% of villages were burned to the ground, as it was confirmed by Amnesty satellite imageries, and even ironically proclaimed by Burmese regime that does not want the Rohingya to return. By now, this number would be well over 70%. In the face of a genocide that is unfolding before our eyes, we need to at least protect those who remain alive. We must send peacekeeping missions, peacekeeping troops, to protect the remaining few villages, to protect an entire ethnicity from being eliminated. We need to implement total arms embargo on Myanmar, to put pressure on India, Israel, and Russia that continue to supply them with weapons. We need to build strong sanctions, bring strong sanctions on Myanmar's trade and economic ties, and impose total travel bans on all its government and military officials. For the Rohingya survivors in Bangladesh, our government has pledged aid, but some of you may or may not know that aid distribution bureaucracy is almost an impossibility in Bangladesh. And as of last week, the Bangladeshi government has banned certain NGOs from operating in the refugee-populated areas. Why can we not provide the Canadian Armed Forces logistics support to deliver this aid? We have pledged this money. How about we deliver them? Why can we not deploy DART to go and build drinking water supplies for the 500,000 plus people who now live in an area as big as Oakville, Ontario, and are drinking from the river that has dead bodies floating on them. Speaking of Bangladesh, I must mention that during my last conversation the day before yesterday with my brothers and sisters that I personally have met with when I visited the camps back in 2015, and I keep communication with them regularly, I learned during our talk that the Bangladeshi army is now preventing refugee boats from coming in. Those who are escaping the burnings that continue to happen are now being turned back when they arrive the shores of Bangladesh. Imagine a boat full of Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany arriving the shores of Canada, and we ask them to go back. Yes, but imagine that history repeating again. Can any of you tolerate, as Canadian citizens, doing acts like that? Why do we not have a responsibility to call on the Bangladeshi government and ask them to stop their madness in this case? Huh? There's lots we can do again, and we will only do if there is political will. Il y a vraiment beaucoup de choses qu'on peut faire, mais on va les faire uniquement only if we see in the account of 20-year-old Rajima and her baby, if we see one of our very 20-year-old sister or daughter who just had a baby, only to see that baby being burned alive before our eyes. We will only do if you and I see our younger nephews and nieces, like Hakim Ali, 9 years old, Naeem, 8, and Chaumong, 7, who I just talked about, who were hacked to death by Burmese army and Buddhist extremists, only if we see in them our own brothers and nephews and nieces. These 43,000 signatures have spoken for Rajuma, have spoken for Hakim Ali, for Naeem, and for Chaumong, who are sisters, daughters, and nephews and nieces of people like you and me. We need to act, and not just say words or give money. We need to take concrete actions.
Thank you, Rais. I'm now going to ask our parliamentarians to say a few words. I'm going to start from my right. MP Alexandra Mendez, if you'd like to please come forward.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm obviously not here in representing the government. I am a Liberal member, but I am here representing myself mostly, member of Parliament for a constituency where this issue has been brought very much to the forefront of our preoccupations. The Canadian government is literally doing diplomatically all it can do to help the situation, except for the withdrawal of the honorary citizenship. There's very little we can do alone. We are even at this point asking that Bangladesh issues exit visas for the people that we would like to bring to Canada, and that is also a challenge. So it's not as if we're not doing anything or trying diplomatically to do all we can, but this is a very, very complicated issue, and I don't think Canada is a country that has a tradition or even the will to just decide to invade another country, because that's not the way Canada does multilateral relations. So this is a very complicated issue, and we have been working closely with our allies to try to address this right to protect that we want to enforce. But I have no easy solution. I absolutely humbly take on the petition, and I will do my best to bring it to the government and to the government's attention. And my commitment to trying to see this this very dramatic situation addressed in the most humanitarian possible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame. Thank you, Madame Mendez. I've been told apparently there's a time limit on statements, so we've got about 10 minutes for the remaining parliamentarians. But I ask Cheryl Hardcastle and Charlie Angus to please come up.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to have my colleague Charlie Angus here with me. I am the critic for the NDP caucus on international human rights, and what you've heard here today is an example of why the government needs to be more emboldened. And I just want to share with you a few thoughts in ways that we can be moving forward, as we've been described, as has been described to us earlier. Instead of the action required to ensure that humanitarian assistance finds its way to the Rohingya, we read today of how the United Nations Food Agency withdrew a critical report revealing desperate hunger among the persecuted Rohingya population after the Myanmar government demanded it be taken down. The report from the World Food Programme warned that more than 80,000 children under the age of 5 living in majority Muslim areas were wasting, a potentially fatal condition of rapid weight loss. They were wasting. We're here today to urge our supernatural and international institutions to move quickly to address this crisis, but instead of the action so desperately required, we have seen that we're getting politics and bureaucratic ass covering. Bangladesh needs the world's financial and non-financial support as it struggles to meet this enormous challenge of supporting the newly arrived. Don't forget, this is a country that is an aspiring democracy with its own unique challenges itself. It requires our international coordination and thoughtful response. Canada needs to work with other countries to help Bangladesh face this crisis and bring the best plans to fruition to ensure that aid gets to where it is needed in Bangladesh, to ensure that the Rohingya people not only successfully escape pogroms and ethnic cleansing, but not end up trapped in the long-term starving prisoners, massively overcrowded refugee camps. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Charlie Angus.
Thank you. Le monde entier a été choqué par la violence en Myanmar. Ce n'est pas acceptable que Madame Aung San Suu Kyi maintienne sa position comme une citoyenne honoraire du Canada. Ses actions ne respectent pas les valeurs canadiennes et elle doit expliquer les violences contre les minoritaires Rohingya. C'est nécessaire pour le Canada de jouer un rôle proactif avec nos alliés de mettre fin à cette violence. There is no messing around with this. We have a president of a country who's committing mass murder against a minority, and she is an honorary citizen of our country. So this is complicated? No. This is simple. Madame Aung San Suu Kyi does not respect the values of Canada. She has to be stripped of that title by the Parliament of Canada, so we send a clear message on whose side we're on. It's not acceptable that the Canadian government is tiptoeing around on this issue. We need to show leadership. We need to be working with our allies in Bangladesh to support the minority situation there with the refugees, but we also have to immediately suspend all arms trades with Myanmar. We have to use every tool that we have to put pressure on that government and pressure on our allies to step up with us. That is the role that Canadians expect us to play. That is the role that Canada can play. And Canada has had a history of stepping up. And we remember Bosnia. And remember the soldiers who went there and the suffering and that they took on. And they did that because those were our values. And we remember Rwanda, and we said we were going to learn lessons. And now the time has come again for Canada to step up, and we have to step up in a very clear fashion, and I'm calling on this Prime Minister today to work with the international community and say Canada will not be tiptoeing around this mass murder, and we will take action. Thank you.
Good job.
And if I could call both Senator Talajan and Mr. Genis, MP Mr. Genis, to come up. Thank you.
So I am Conservative Senator Salma Talajan, and I have been speaking on the plight of the Rohingya people for the past 6 years, 19 times in the Senate and the committees. I also, whenever I see the Burmese delegation, I always make a point of talking to them and asking about the situation. Recently, I spoke to Zhao Te when he was visiting Canada, the Aung San Suu Kyi's political spokesperson, and he just looked at me, crossed his arms and said, "No Rohingya." Well, The horrors of Bosnia and Rwanda are still, the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda are still fresh in our minds. And we said never again. Well, make no mistake, it's happening all over again. History is repeating itself, and Canada needs to act now. The time for words is long gone. And I'll turn over to Garnet.
Thank you so much. I want to recognize the work of the organizers on this petition. I want to thank those of you in the press for being here as well and for bringing attention to this question. I appreciate your dedication to telling these stories. We in the official opposition have been asking questions about the plight of the Rohingya, not just recently, but over the last year and a half, because this situation has a history that goes back to 1982, the citizenship law, and there's been a continual escalation of persecution and violence. We've called what's happening right now a genocide. We've called for stronger action, and I had the pleasure of requesting an emergency debate, and we went forward. I don't know if pleasure is maybe not the right word, but the honor of pushing that issue forward, because it was important that we have the emergency debate in the House of Commons to drive this discussion. It's important that we not let ourselves feel helpless on this. Yes, there are limitations to what we can do, but we have certainly not reached those limitations. We are nowhere near the outer limits of what we can do as a country to push this issue forward. Some suggestions are made in the petition. I would just really emphasize two things on that point. One is we need to have a sustained emphasis on this that doesn't just follow the immediate cycle of a few weeks when people are really paying attention to this. We need it to be working on this issue a year ago, more than a year ago, and we need to continue to have a sustained focus on this going forward. But number two, we need to prioritize this issue in multilateral fora. I think it was important that the non-mention of this issue in the Security Council, in the UN General Assembly speech was discussed. That was important. But going forward, Canada needs to prioritize discussion of these issues in multilateral fora. I do want to just say as well, we bring a message as well on behalf of our leader, Andrew Scheer, for whom this is a personal priority and who has himself made a statement in the House of Commons with respect to the Rohingya. So I know there are parliamentarians from all parties that are engaged on this issue, and we need to have a prioritization of these issues in multilateral fora and a sustained focus on them going forward to bring about an end to the violence.
Thank you all. Now, if there are any questions, if you could ask them to whoever you'd like to respond, we'd be happy to. I guess everything that was said, needed to be said, was said. Well, thank you very much for coming here today for covering this, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers and the others who've been up here for support. The media has a huge role in covering this issue, and without your help, we cannot help these people. So we ask for the media to join us in not only keeping this issue alive in the public sphere, in the media sphere, but where you can, please support us. I know that you're here to do a story, but none of what we are asking for can be done without the help of our media allies. Thank you very much.
Sorry, you want to mention Burma Task Force?
Yes, I'd like to thank you, Burma Task Force, who have been the lead on this, and I'd also like to acknowledge the help from Change.org, who've been instrumental in helping me get this petition. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that was good.
Thank you.
Would any of you like to take
Yes.
one of the petitions?
Yes.
We can split it between the... okay.